Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Steve Levingston, nonfiction book editor of the Washington Post, which is a charter sponsor of the National Book Festival. First, a couple quick housekeeping things. We'd like to extend a word of thanks to the festival's co-chairman, David Rubenstein, and the other generous sponsors who've made this event possible. If you'd like to contribute your financial support, there's some information about that in the program. Before we begin, I've been asked to remind you that these events are being recorded by the Library of Congress, which may broadcast them at some future date. After our author's presentation, there will be time for questions. But if you don't want to become part of the library's permanent collection, it may be better to let someone else ask the questions. And now also I need to ask you if you wouldn't mind silencing your cell phones. That also would be wonderful. Thank you. Most writers can only dream of the success that Jeffery Deaver lives as an everyday reality. To outsiders, his life as a writer must be as thrilling as the books he writes. If you're here today, you probably don't need an introduction to this master craftsman. You've probably read more than a few of Deaver's 30-plus novels and his scores of short stories. Once you start reading, you can't stop. That's the amazing talent of Jeffery Deaver. He makes bestsellerdom look easy. But his sales aren't the only measure of his success. He has collected a shelf full of awards: the Nero Wolfe Award, the 3 Ellery Queen Readers Awards, the Fleming Steel Dagger, and the Short Story Dagger Award. He is among that rare group of elite writers chosen to carry on the James Bond franchise. In its review of Carte Blanche, the Washington Post said Deaver brilliantly captured the immortal character of James Bond and called the tale magnificently manic, impeccably researched, with Deaver's trademark misdirection and twists. Deaver's best-known series features the characters you all know: quadriplegic detective Lincoln Rhyme and his partner Amelia Sachs. His first in the series, The Bone Collector, was made into a movie starring Denzel Washington and Angelina Jolie. His latest, the 14th in the series, out now, is The Cutting Edge. If you haven't read it, I don't want to spoil it for you. I'll let the reviewers entice you. The New York Times said Deaver is at his graciously cruel best in this one. His flair for ghastly irony is on full display. Publishers Weekly gave The Cutting Edge a starred review, calling it a roller coaster ride of a thriller. Well, what more needs to be said? He's the best at what he does. Please join me in welcoming Jeffery Deaver.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you to Karen, who's been wonderful, my escort today around this amazing festival. Thank you to the Library of Congress, and especially thank you, readers. You make it all worthwhile for us. Now, as Steve said, he gave you a bit of a background, but I'll fill in a little bit. I have written about 40 novels, 80 or so short stories, an album of country western songs. Believe it or not, I respect you too much to sing, don't worry. A nonfiction law book. I say nonfiction law book. I do practice fiction, so you can make of that what you wish. A radio play, but there's one thing in my long career I have not tried, and I thought I would tonight: plagiarism. I've been writing a book about writing fiction for some years. It's taken me a little, I do write quite a bit of my own work, so it's taken me a while to do it. But the format of this book is where I extract quotations from other writers who are far more intelligent and articulate than I, and use that as kind of a springboard to talk about, I guess what I'd say, the chronological process of writing a novel. And that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to look at the 8 or 9 chapter headings. And don't worry, you'll be out of here at the allotted time. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I approach this crazy world of writing. First, however, I have to give you, as I'm going to do throughout the evening, some quotations, but these are devil's advocates. And we'll start with Lillian Hellman, the great writer from the Round Table in the Algonquin Hotel next to the New Yorker at the time, New Yorker magazine at the time. And Lillian Hellman said this: if I had to give young writers any advice about writing, I would say, never listen to writers giving you advice about writing. And the brilliant Somerset Maugham said this: there are 3 simple rules for writing a great novel. Sadly, no one knows what they are. Well, with all respect to those fine, if somewhat disparate authors, I disagree. Given a desire to write, given a command of whatever, I was going to say English, but whatever language you're comfortable composing in, and given this thing called sweat labor, because a lot of writing is simply sitting down and muscling your way through a story or book. Given those, it's a skill like anything else, and you can learn how to do it. So we're going to begin, again, sort of the chronological process of creating a novel. And chapter 1 of my book is why write? Why on earth do we do this crazy thing? William Safire said this: I write because I enjoy expressing myself, and writing forces me to think more coherently than when I'm just shooting my mouth off. There's a serious side to why we write, too. Reynolds Price, the great North Carolinian writer: I write because it's really the only thing I'm very good at in the world, and I've got to stay busy to keep from going crazy, to keep from dying of depression. Jonathan Safran Foer: why do I write? It's not that I want people to think I'm a smart or that I'm a good writer. I write because I want to end loneliness. That, before and after everything else, is what books do. They show us that communication is possible across distance. And of course, we come to William Burroughs, and who doesn't want this on his or her bucket list? As a young child, I wanted to be a writer because writers were rich and famous. They lounged around Singapore smoking opium and wearing a yellow pongee silk suit. They sniffed cocaine in Mayfair and lived in the native quarter of Tangier, languidly caressing their pet gazelle. We've all been there, right? Why do I write? I write because I was a nerd. But I was a nerd when the word meant something. You know what a nerd is now. You have $1 billion, some kind of social networking company, and frankly, you appeared before Senate subcommittees about why you handed the U.S. election over to the Russians. Oh, I'm sorry. I swore I was not going to talk politics. I was a Leave It to Beaver kind of nerd. I said that once at a presentation, and this young girl came up to me. She was quite cross. She said, "Mr. Deaver, Justin Bieber is not a nerd." I was pudgy, clumsy, socially inept, no talent for sports whatsoever, uniformly ignored by pom-pom girls and cheerleaders. And it was for pretty good reason that I was the last person picked on the sports team. Maybe some of you, ladies and gentlemen, will know that experience, that mortifying experience. They would put me in, I think it was right field, where statistically fewer balls were hit, where I could do the least damage. And understandably, because I'd be sitting there and I'd get the glove on the correct hand, then I'd be looking up and say, that cloud is cool. You know, that cloud, I could make a story out of that cloud. But then even then I was writing as a young boy, and I think I can remember it. I'd write poetry. The score is tied, 3 boys on base. I see the batter's happy face as he grips the bat and looks my way. All I can do is hope and pray that he won't hit to me. But we all know how it goes. He whacks that ball and it breaks my nose. Well, you know, it didn't matter because I had something better than sports. I had the Glen Ellen Public Library, where I spent my after-school hours, where I spent many summers. I fell in love with these things called books. They could take us out of ourselves, out of our daily cares. They could teach us about things that we had no other way of learning, and they did something else. Do you remember when maybe you were the new kid at school and you were mortified? You didn't know a soul, and you'd look across the playground and kind of sidle up to somebody too shy to say anything, but then you noticed they were holding a copy of Lord of the Rings, or Laura Ingalls Wilder, Little House on the Prairie, or Ray Bradbury. And only then could you make eye contact. And you say, you get to the part about the dragon yet? Or did you meet this character or that? And then your eyes locked, And even though you didn't know that person from Adam or Eve, you really did. Why? Because of books. Books brought you together. I knew then, at a young age, that I wanted to devote my life to writing. That was chapter 1. Why do we write? Chapter 2, finding a subject to write about. Francine Matthews said this, and actually I was with Francine Matthews when I heard her say that at the National Book Festival. Francine said, "I always heard write what you know. I disagree. I say write about what you love. You can always research the rest." Flannery O'Connor, anybody who has survived childhood has enough material about life to last for the rest of their days as a writer. Where do I get my ideas? What do I write about? I was on a panel in England a few years ago with one of the great doyens of cozy fiction, and you're in the genre room, so you know cozy fiction are a little softer kind of books, Agatha Christie books. And the question was posed to her. She was the headliner, and she said, "Well, where do I get my ideas?" I sit down in my parlor with a cup of tea, and I wait for my muse, whose name was Philomena, to tap me on the head with her magic wand, and poof, there's an idea. Well, I laughed, of course. Who wouldn't? I chortled. It wasn't a laugh. It was like one of those visceral chortles. And not a soul in the audience was smiling. They were staring reverently at this wonderful writer, in awe of her and Philomena, the muse. And you know how you try to turn that into a cough? It doesn't work. And so then the question went to me. And you know, in this day and age, everything you have ever said is on the internet, along with everything you've done in Cabo and should not have done, but it's all there. So I had to tell the truth. I said, well, you know, frankly, I sit down, when in America we don't really have parlors as such, we have studies or dens. I have a beverage too. It ain't tea. And I try to simply think of a way to scare the ever-living hell out of you. You know, you get into a taxi cab at an airport, a strange city, and it goes the opposite way of where you think you should be going, and then you realize there are no handles on the door, the beginning of the bone collector. Mickey Spillane said people don't read books to get to the middle. We don't pick up a 500-page book saying, I cannot wait to get to page 250 and put it down. So I look very, very hard at a story that will allow me to move very quickly, that will allow me to scare you, that will be very tense. A book, to me, is the most emotionally engaging experience we can possibly have. I binge on TV. Who doesn't love, you know, the new Get Shorty on Epix or Breaking Bad? And, you know, we all play Candy Crush or Crunch. I don't, so otherwise I'd know what the name is. But, you know, we have fun doing that. We look at wonderful, wonderful paintings, listen to symphony orchestras, but we participate with the author in the creation of the story. We see it in our head. Whether we listen to it on audio or we read it, we are living, breathing partners. And so I look for something that will create the most engaging emotional experience we can. You should miss bus stops. You should show up for work late. So that's what I look for, ideas that will let me race through the book. Chapter 3, and this is a bit controversial. I'm sure there's some writers out there, and the world is divided into the two groups I'm about to talk about, and I'll describe it in a moment. A quotation from Joyce Carol Oates. The first sentence of your story cannot be written until you know what the last sentence is. Ernest Hemingway, prose is architecture, not interior design. Gustave Flaubert, books are made the way pyramids are made, according to a long pondered plan, and then the blocks of stone are set one atop the other. I subscribe to this theory. The world I was talking about is divided into plotters and pantsers. Plotters, as in those of us who outline, and pantsers, as in seat of the pants, and they wing it. And I'm sorry, I'm a bit adamant about this. I don't get on an airplane that has not been built according to engineering diagrams long ahead of time. I don't go into surgery if the doctor has not, you know, planned out exactly what is going to happen. Why should I read a book that has not been crafted that way? What I do is spend 8 months on my outline. It's a full-time job. I do the research at the same time, so that's kind of the preparation aspect of the book. It is so important to do. And there are two main reasons why I believe firmly that one should outline. First of all, thrillers, and I'll even extend that to any genre fiction, and you know what, I'm going to extend it to any story you tell at all, is about structure. It is about structure as much as, or more so than, fine prose. I would much rather read pedestrian writing. I write in a very meat and potatoes kind of style, and yet have a structured story that follows, say, a symphonic structure. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. If Beethoven had created 5 vivace movements right after another, you're going to get bored by the last 2. On the same token, if there are 5 adagios, you're going to fall asleep. What does he do? He intersperses those, sort of a sine curve to the crescendo, the da 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 da, and then at the end there's a coda, a reconciliation of the themes. And what an exciting experience that is. And Beethoven knew how to get us excited and get us going. A thriller should be the same thing, and an outline lets you do that. You can look at your Post-it notes and you can say, oh no, I've got two bodies, one right next to another. We've got to change that scene. Outline lets you structure. And the second reason to outline, you don't have to raise your hand, but just ask yourself, have you ever read a book that should not have been written? How does that happen? Let's say you come up with a beautiful set piece, and set piece in the literature and the movie business is simply a very exciting scene where it doesn't necessarily have to be action, though it often is. The beginning of Deadpool, the movie, for instance, which some of you have seen, whether you want to admit it or not. It was a great film. But you come up with this great idea for your first chapter, the prologue of chapter 1, so exciting. And you sit down and this chapter writes itself. 5 hours, 6 hours, bang, you've got 30 pages of a perfect chapter. Wow, that is so good. And the energy is up and the steam is up and you just, whoosh, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5 is kind of a brick wall. But we've created 180 or so pages of well-crafted prose. And I guarantee that everybody in this room can write well-crafted prose. You can do it. If you know what you want to write, you can do it. Well, you've got, let's say, 200 pages of this bang-up ending, and then you don't know what the middle is going to be, that dreaded middle. And you think, oh, I could fill it with the cliches that we see, a car chase. Or we've never seen this. The police detective has a fight with his captain, and the captain demands the badge and gun, and he has to go renegade. I'll put that in. And then there's no ending, just a Deus Ex Machina ending, and the villain comes from out of left field. We never saw the villain until the final scene. Well, you're confronted with 2 choices now, and you're going to get my take on it by some of the adjectives I use. The first take is the morally reprehensible, intellectually dishonest, cowardly approach, and that's to tack on that middle, that bad middle, and do the cliche-ridden ending and put it out in the stream of commerce. And why is that a crime? Because we authors owe you 100%, and that book would be less than 100%. That's option 1. Option 2 is to do the morally courageous, uplifting, correct, and righteous thing, throw it out, every single page. And that includes that wonderful bang-up set piece beginning. Because if you can write a good beginning, a good set piece for a bad novel, think of the wonderful set piece beginning you can start your book with in a good novel. Now, let's cut to the outline. You take Post-it notes, you write on the first Post-it note, big set piece beginning, and that's all you write. That goes in the upper left-hand corner of your corkboard, something, and I use something very much like the size of that. And then you start sticking things in the middle and little notes to the side, another murder here, detective has a fight here. 3 weeks go by, and you're staring at that corkboard, and you say, you know, there's no middle. I cannot think of anything, there's no middle. And you look at the end, no, there's no end, it's just a cliche. You wad up 30 Post-it notes, throw it out, you've wasted a week's time, and you start over on something new. Certainly, you can write the prose if you want, and maybe you can kind of think through things ahead of time, but I myself like to get it all planned out. Okay, now we're going to jump to chapter 4, and we're going to talk about writing the novel itself, and this is putting words into putting words onto the page. Nathaniel Hawthorne, a writer's words should dissolve into pure thought. A writer's words should dissolve into pure thought. I love that. What he means by that, of course, is that you shouldn't fill up your story with pyrotechnic prose. You should not put in similes that are off the wall so that the reader reads a passage and says, wow, that's firecracker writing. That is so damn good. I have no clue what it means, but it's just great writing. Nathaniel Hawthorne's comment, Stephen King said, any word you have to hunt for in a thesaurus is the wrong word. Stephen King, another one, said, the road to hell is paved with adverbs. I love that. And since I've mentioned some wonderful, erudite, wise, sage literary philosophers, I'm going to quote now my favorite, Dr. Seuss. It has often been said, there's so much to be read, you can never keep all those words in your head. So the writer who breeds more words than he needs is making a chore for the reader who reads. That's why my belief is, the briefer the brief is, the greater the sigh of the reader's relief is. And that's why your books have such power and strength when you publish with shorth. Shorth is better than length. Less is always more. For my writing the book itself, as I said, I have a very pedestrian style. You know, our language skills are pretty much formed by the time we're 8 or 9 years old. You expand your vocabulary considerably. You learn things about the dative and ablative cases, but nonetheless, you at a very young age, you kind of get your tone and your voice, and that's what you should listen to. Once the outline is done, then I can sit down and I can write the book in any order. I could write the beginning at the end at the beginning. I have the chapters all planned out. I may come to a scene of a vicious murder, and I just don't feel like viciously murdering somebody at that point. We all have those days, right? Some of you didn't respond to that. Maybe you want to murder somebody every day. I myself save those days for when. Let me explain. I'm a writer, correct? What do we writers, like most in the world, excuses not to write? And what's the best excuse not to write? Yes, the internet and YouTube, watching videos of baby goats in pajamas. And enough people laugh, so you know exactly what I'm talking about, don't you? So what happens? I wake up one morning and, oh no, the internet is out. My cable's gone. So in a panic, I call the unnamed Time Warner cable. Oh, I wasn't going to say that. And I say, please get somebody out here. And they say, okay, well, tomorrow morning we'll get a repairman there at 8 in the morning and we'll get you all straightened out. 8 in the morning comes, 9 comes, 10 comes, 11, 12. 4 o'clock, the guy strolls in and he looks at my cable box and says, oh, that's I don't know, an XK42 box. I can't work on that. Those are the days when I want to viciously murder somebody. And guess what the name of my next victim is and what unnamed cable company he works for. Anyway, when you put the prose together, you have an outline. You can write in any order. Write in a natural style. Okay, chapter 5, we're going to look at editing and revising. Ernest Hemingway said, there are no great writers. There are only great rewriters. And I firmly believe that. If it sounds like writing, Elmore Leonard said, I rewrite. For my part, because I bang the story out very, very quickly, I will produce 130,000 words in 2 months. But that draft, that's my first draft, it's two things. It's too long and it's sloppy because it's easier to write long than it is to write short. And it's also easier to write more sloppily than it is to write very concisely and well. So what I do is I let the manuscript sit for as long as I can to get kind of a fresh take, and then I revise it. I must revise 50 times. Now that's not 100% revision. Toward the end of that, it's much more finely tuned. But so, I don't know, realistically 35 to 40 or 50 drafts. Now, if any of you are taking notes because you think some of these comments might be helpful, there's one thing you do absolutely have to do. The first revisions on your computer, because it's very easy to globally search and replace if you want to change names, move chapters and paragraphs around, but then you have to print it out because there may be some psychologists, some reading specialists here, there may very well be, and they could tell you far better than I could, but there is a different psychological process of experiencing a book on paper. I guarantee it. And I have an e-reader, and I read books a lot, e-books, but it is a richer experience. And that means for writers that we then see things that we would otherwise have missed on the screen. And I'm not talking about typos, that's true for those, of course, but I'm also talking about conceptual problems. And you know, it's kind of artful if an author uses the same word in a paragraph, kind of a distinctive word. An example would be, this is far-fetched, nobody would ever do this, but the detective walked into the avocado-colored room, and he reached down and searched for the gun, and his hand touched something that was soft as an avocado. And then he said, you know, the bad guy stared at him with avocado pits for eyes. If you haven't read my books, they are better than that. I mean, just don't panic. Don't panic. But something like that could be missed on the screen. But when you go to read the book on paper, those things will jump out for you. Again, then I read it aloud, the whole book. I read it aloud because that helps you find things. And you know, the novel form is very new in the history of civilization. The storytelling tradition has always been oral, either plays or poetry, read poetry. And so the idea of people sitting down and opening a book is, you know, only goes back a few hundred years. So I think there should be some magic in the sound of the words. And so I read it aloud. And you can see where, you know, people might stumble, two words together don't quite fit, two sibilants running into each other. So that's a trick that I use quite frequently with my stories. Okay, now we have to talk about this. Oh my God, chapter 6, writer's block. Oh, I was going to give you the wise, sage, erudite, literary philosopher name, but you're going to have to guess this one. It was a dark and stormy night. Oh, good writing is hard work. And who was that? Snoopy the Beagle, of course. Terry Pratchett said this: "There's no such thing as writer's block. It was invented by people in California who can't write." Larry Kahaner: "I don't believe in writer's block. Do doctors have doctor's block? Do plumbers have plumber's block? No, we all have days when we don't feel like working, but why do writers turn it into something so damn special by giving it a faintly romantic name?" Well, I subscribe to all of the above there. There is no such thing as writer's block. However, there is idea block. If you know what you want to write, you can write it. I guarantee that. If you have an idea that's viable, you can write it. But coming up with those ideas can be extremely difficult. That's why the outlines take me 8 months to do. And that can involve pacing back and forth in front of that corkboard, trying to figure out what the hell is going to happen here. How can I get the clue in the middle of the book so that the reader gets to the end and says, oh my, I should have seen that he was the villain. I should have figured that out. But when you do that, then you can, again, write the book in any order. There is a kind of writer's block that Larry was somewhat referring to. You know, a surgeon wakes up in the morning and she's got an 8-hour brain aneurysm she has to repair and just doesn't want to do it because it's a huge amount of work. We wake up, we have to copy edit for 8-10 hours. Well, you know, I'm sorry. We get paid to make up stuff for a living, so, you know, we live a pretty good life. So you roll up your sleeves, you get into the room where you write, and you just do the work. That's not block. That's everybody's tendency to be a bit you know, frankly, just a bit lazy, and who isn't and who doesn't mind that? Chapter 7, Critics and Criticism. Sebastian Junger, I wrote my first novel in 7th grade, longhand in a green composition notebook. My teacher read it aloud to the entire class, chapter by chapter. No wonder I didn't have a single friend. Neil Gaiman, remember when people tell you something's wrong or doesn't work for them in one of your books, they're almost always right. When they tell you how to fix it, they're almost always wrong. David Mitchell, this is great. When you show someone something you've written, you give them a sharpened stake, you're lying down in your coffin, and you say, whenever you're ready. For me, I've had, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've had lots of rejection. I think one of my favorite rejections was this. Do you all know what self-addressed stamped envelopes are? Now it's a different world. You submit your book electronically in most cases. But a self-addressed stamped envelope was when you had the 300-page manuscript in an envelope. You included in that package to the publisher or agent an envelope addressed back to you with enough postage on it so they would then send you the manuscript back with a probably 5 to 10 lengthy, pithy critique of your book, which told you in 10 lines how to fix it and send it back to them. And then whereupon they would send you a contract for the next 10 books. Well, I got back my self-addressed stamped envelope, and I picked it up and shook it, and no, it didn't contain gold, and it didn't seem to have money and lots of contracts in it. It had my manuscript, of course, and here's the form it was in. It had clearly fallen on the floor of the publisher, because the pages were every which way. Those were the days when you could still smoke, and there was a cigarette butt mixed in with it. And instead of this wise, very erudite letter telling me how to correct the manuscript, it was my own cover letter upside down with a shoe print on it. And I thought at the time, well, clearly somebody dropped it accidentally. They loved it, but they didn't have time to put the pages back together. Thought they'd send it back, and the footprint was an accident. Now I think they drew straws to see who got to step on it. But I find that comments, that feedback is very, very important. I was at a book signing once in California, and a woman in her 90s came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, Mr. Deaver, we have a reading club, a readers club in the retirement community next to the bookstore. We read all your books and we love them, but this latest book, we had some trouble with it, and I got elected to come up and express our criticism." And I said, no, I like that. I want that. I want to hear what doesn't work as much as I want to hear what does work, so the next time I won't do it. She said, well, okay, it's about the violence in your books. I said, please tell me. She said, well, we read this book and we think you're going soft on us. The Bone Collector, you scalded that couple to death in the first chapter. And in chapter 18, you had rats crawling all over that girl. In this book, one guy got stabbed, another one got shot, and they both lived. We want you to get back to your roots. Well, does that mean I'm going to, make what are those stupid movies? Saw, these ridiculous torture movies? No, that's ridiculous. Okay, well, we're going to get to chapter 8 now, and I do want to leave a little time for questions. But chapter 8, humorous interlude on famous rejection letters. Lest you think this business is sad and full of drudgery. Oh no, there's a lot of humor out there too. Here's some real quotes from rejection letters. I'm sorry, Mr. Kipling, you don't know how to use the English language. Your poems are remarkable for their defects and devoid of truly poetical qualities. Emily Dickinson. It is impossible to sell animal stories in the United States. George Orwell's Animal Farm. This book will set publishing back 25 years, Norman Mailer. You're welcome to John le Carré. He has no future. And my two favorites are, you'd have a decent book if you got rid of that Gatsby fellow. And I think my all-time favorite is this. My dear sir, I have to ask, does it have to be a whale? Chapter 9, The Daily Life of a Writer. J.K. Rowling, be ruthless about protecting your writing days. That is, don't give in to endless requests to have essential or, quote, long overdue meetings on those days. The funny thing is that although I've been writing as an actual job for several years now, I still seem to have to find time in which to do it. People don't seem to grasp that I still have to sit down in peace and write the books, apparently believing they pop up like mushrooms without my connivance. I must therefore guard the time allotted to writing the way a Hungarian horntail guards its firstborn egg. Ray Bradbury, you must write every single day of your life. You must lurk in libraries, climb the stacks like ladders, to sniff books like perfume, and wear them like hats upon your crazy head. Lee Child, don't get it right, get it written. And Henry Miller, keep human, see people, go places, have friends, drink if you feel like it. For me, it's a job. That's all it is, a full-time job. I was an attorney for some years. I was a journalist for some years. I spend more time now at this job than I did then, even working on Wall Street many years ago. I find that it is something that you can devote your entire life to. You are never bored as an author. If you have your computer with you or a pen and paper, ideas pop up, I write them down, I may use them, I may not, but it's very consuming. And when I tell my students, you have to ask yourself what kind of relationship you want with writing. I write full time, but it's a very arduous job. It's not for everybody. I like to spend time alone. I don't play well with others. It's just the way it is. But you may not want to do that. You might want to write a book every 10 years. You might want to self-publish. That's all perfectly valid. But to live your daily life as a writer, you have to kind of figure out where you fall in this crazy world. Well, these are just a fraction of the thoughts that writers have shared about the craft of telling stories. How varied are the authors I've quoted? How varied are the works they've created? How separated in time, in geography, in sensibility. But if we step back, we see one thing they all have in common, and that's the passionate desire to reach into the hearts and minds of readers and make them laugh or cry or scream in terror, somehow to better understand this mad world we live in, and in doing that, to make our time on earth a little saner, a little richer, and frankly, nothing wrong with it, a little more fun. And you can quote me on that last one. So what I'd like to do now, I think we have, I'm a little long-winded, but we have about 5 minutes for some questions. And as you gathered, I do teach, so if nobody volunteers, I'm going to call on people. So, and I think the protocol is we have a microphone here, is that right? To take, if anybody would like to come forward with a question, or over there, someone? Okay, let me think. Oh, okay, this gentleman has saved you there. Okay, thank you.
I'm really curious about your outlines. How detailed are they?
I'm sorry, with the...
Your outlines.
Oh, how detailed are my outlines? They're quite detailed. They're about 150 pages, but that's single-spaced, but they only take half they have very big margins. Why? Because when I research, I have notebooks where I transcribe all the notes I've taken for research, and I number those, page number those. So I put my outline in front of me, and the outline, of course, 8.5 by 11. So imagine this part is completely blank. I open my notebook that contains the research, and I'll see chapter 32, Lincoln Rhyme has to solve a clue involving mustard. And I've done a lot of research into mustard, and so I look at my book. Mustard is on page 42 in the research, so I write P42 here. And I go through the entire outline. By the time it's finished, so the outline's done, all the research is there, and then I put the outline in front of me and just start writing. That's how it works. Any other questions? Oh my goodness! Yeah, I know it's we're well past cocktail hour, and I do appreciate your patience coming out. But yes, sir.
I'd be interested to know how you came up with your character, Lincoln Rhyme.
Where did Lincoln Rhyme come from? And if you're not familiar with him, he is a forensic detective a la CSI, although he predated CSI. But he's a quadriplegic. He's paralyzed from the neck down in an injury at a crime scene. And I created him, oddly enough, as a a reaction to what I saw in popular fiction that I have, and I'm guilty of it myself. You see it more in thriller movies, where the hero, it comes down to the end, the big climactic scene at the end, and the bad guy is beating up the good guy. And it's always, you know, a little, we know what's going to happen. Is there anybody in the world who doesn't know that Tom Cruise or Harrison Ford are going to prevail, and that Jeremy Irons or Philip Seymour Hoffman doing the star turn as the villain is going to go down in a big way, usually over a cliff? And I thought, there's nothing wrong with that, but let's get that twist in. I like my surprises. I always have 3 or 4 surprise endings in my books. So wouldn't it be interesting if instead of having a gun taped up under the table that the hero remembers, or he gets hit in the head and he remembers his father taught him to kickbox when he was 8, but he had father issues, so it was a repressed memory, and then it comes back and beats the hell out of the bad guy. How about if my hero couldn't do that? He had to outthink the villain. He had to set up something in his mind, sort of Sherlock Holmes. That's really where he came from. And I frankly never thought he would be as popular as he's become. But you know, the comments I get that from people who many are disabled and many not, that you know we're all our minds first. Who knows? I don't know karate. I mean, my self-defense is to look for the exit and run. That's pretty effective. But we all are, you know, our minds and our hearts and our souls first. And I think that's what Lincoln has embodied. And I'm working on, you know, another one. I'll keep writing them for as long as you're interested in reading them. Do we have time for maybe one more? Or? Okay, we can get a couple more. Okay. Yes, please.
I just wonder if you believe there's a book in everyone's life.
I'm just going to step up here so I can hear you a little better, if you don't mind.
I'm sorry.
No.
You believe there's a book in everyone's life that could be written.
The question was a very good one. Is there a book in everyone's life that needs to be written? I'll be honest. Probably not. But I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why I say that. Because I approach writing as a, you know, for me it's a business. A book is a very, very difficult thing to construct. I've learned these techniques I've told you. I've learned them over. Well, I started writing when I was 12 years old. So a book, no, but there is a story that needs to be told. I wrote, as I mentioned, a lot of poetry. I wrote short stories. I have no art ability. My sister, Jolie Deaver, is a very talented artist and writer. She got the art. But those are ways that we can tell our stories. And yes, we have to do that. A book, I found, discourages people. And so those stories within us don't get out because they start out by telling a memoir that is maybe better told in poetry or a graphic novel or a comic book. And that's, you know, those are very serious art forms now. So yes, tell your story, but just remember that a 400-page novel may be a bit daunting. Could we get yes, another one, please?
I have a double question. So the first one is related to criticism. You were talking about criticism. I realized in The Cutting Edge that these detailed flip charts you usually had in your Lincoln Rhyme novels, they have disappeared.
I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback here. I think maybe the audience could hear you, but I'm just gonna step up because it's a little hard for me to hear.
The flip charts, they have disappeared from The Cutting Edge. So the detailed flip charts, was that part of a reaction to feedback you got from readers? That's the first part. And the second question would be, what happened to your other character, Catherine Dance?
The question was, if you're familiar with the Lincoln Rhyme books, I had charts of evidence in all of them up to the Cutting Edge, my most recent, the 14th. And I found that I was getting a lot of comments from readers that they didn't read them because it's very detailed forensic information. And I put them in to kind of orient the reader, but then I've gotten feedback over the years that they felt guilty. They didn't read them, like they were skimming over something. And so I thought I'm going to leave them out. And another thing I've done intentionally, and this you might find this interesting if you're readers, if you're writers, I've taken the modern sensibilities of creative, I call them products, but we could say creative efforts, into mind. What does that mean? We binge on TV. It's a fast-paced life now. We don't have a lot of time. My books are a little shorter. My writing style is a little more staccato, shorter sentences, shorter words. I will maybe come up with what I think is a eloquent word that might mean people have to look it up, and I take that out. I took out the charts, and you know, I really am gauging the book to make it an experience for everybody, and like everyone else nowadays, we want to get the younger readers involved. And my books are, you know, appropriate for, say, 14-year-old and up. So you know, that was a very conscious effort on my part based on feedback. The other characters, yes, Lincoln Rhyme is the most famous, and I write more of those. I have, you know, many important people dependent on me. The CEOs of American Express, MasterCard, Visa, and my bank, Wells Fargo, that has the mortgage on my house. So realistically, I mean, to be honest, it's a business. I make more money with the Lincoln Rhyme books. But I have a Catherine Dance book in the works and working on a new series right now. So I guess that future plans would be a good way to say thank you all for coming. Thank you for your support of books. And go forth and read.